This is our time. Live in the studio with Carolina Coral, I welcome the viewers of freedom. Let's get straight to the news. The Russian army struck the regional children's clinical hospital in Kherson. Among the injured are children. All those injured are receiving medical assistance. At the time of the strike, about 100 people were in the hospital. The building's windows, doors, walls, and expensive equipment were damaged. President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Russia could not have been unaware of where the Russian army was striking. This is a deliberate attack specifically on children, on medical staff, on the basic guarantees of life in society.
Right now, Russia is the largest terrorist organization in the world, which not only drags out its terrorist war, but also tries to do everything possible to prevent any opportunity to end the war from working. Russia deliberately undermines every meaningful diplomatic effort, discredits those who help protect lives, and tries to create new sources of destabilization in Europe to make it harder for Europeans to help Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Almost 130 attack drones were launched by Russia against Ukraine last night. This was reported by the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The attack was repelled by aviation, electronic warfare and drone units, and mobile fire groups of Ukraine's defense forces. The attack was carried out simultaneously from several directions. And, according to preliminary data, air defense shot down or suppressed 93 Russian drones. There were 148 combat clashes on the front line over the past day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. 7 attacks by Russian occupiers were recorded in both the Heliopol and Orikhiv directions. In the Lyman sector, the Ukrainian armed forces repelled 13 enemy attacks. Another 18 assaults by the aggressor took place in the Kostantinivka direction and 23 in the Oleksandrovka direction. The hottest spot on the front remains the Pokrovsk direction. There, Russian units tried 45 times to break through the Ukrainian defenses. 1,150 Russian occupiers were eliminated on the front line in just the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have already nearly reached 1,140,000 people. In addition, the day before, the defense forces destroyed 4 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles, 20 artillery systems, 1 Russian multiple rocket launcher was burned, and 81 units of enemy automotive and special equipment were destroyed. On the night of October 29th, Ukraine's defense forces struck 2 Russian oil refineries, Novospassky in the Ulyanovsk region and Mariupol in the Republic. Mariel. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, explosions and fires were recorded at both sites. The Budyanovsky gas processing plant in the Stavropol region was also hit. A production unit was damaged there. In Russia's Kemerovo region, a car was blown up. Inside was a police lieutenant colonel, commander of the OMON Obereg special unit of the Russian National Guard, Veniamin Matsurin. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the eliminated Matsurin was involved in war crimes against the civilian population of the Kiev region. During the occupation in 2022, it was his unit that took part in punitive operations in Bucha and neighboring villages. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the bombing of the OMON commander is a reminder of the inevitability of punishment for those involved in crimes against Ukrainians. Agents of the partisan movement, Atesh set fire to a relay cabinet in temporarily occupied Tokmak, Zaporizhzhia region. It provided the Russians with control over train movements on a critically important route. Atesh reported that Russian occupiers used this railway junction to transfer military equipment, ammunition, and personnel to the Zaporizhzhia direction. The sabotage disrupted the schedule of military transports and will complicate the maneuvering of Russian troops. SSU drones struck a Pantsir S-2 surface-to-air missile system. 2 oil depots and 2 Russian radar stations in temporarily occupied Crimea were also hit. This was reported by a source from the Security Service of Ukraine to Freedom TV channel. The cost of a Pantsir S-2 is about $20 million. It is one of the key components of the enemy's air defense system. The Russian army will also face significant problems due to the destruction of the radar stations, because every air defense system taken out of action seriously weakens Russia's defenses in temporarily occupied Crimea, according to the SBU. Ukrainian drones also struck the Komsomolskoye oil depot and a similar facility in the village of Gvardiskoye. A large fire broke out there. Germany will equip its brigade in Lithuania with strike drones. To do this, Berlin plans to sign a major contract for the supply of kamikaze drones with defense startups, Helsing and Stark, as well as the Rheinmetall Group. According to the National Times, the plan is to produce up to 12,000 strike drones in total. Some of these will be delivered to arm the new German brigade in Lithuania to protect NATO's eastern flank. If Russia strikes Brussels, NATO members will level Moscow to the ground. This statement was made by Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken in an interview with the Morgan. However, he doubts that Putin would actually dare to take such a step. According to the minister, he is more concerned about possible hybrid actions by Russia in the Baltic countries. The EU will allocate €250 million for the development of infrastructure to counter drones. This was reported by the Polish Minister of Internal Affairs after negotiations between government delegations of European countries in Gdansk. Warsaw will seek to increase funding, Marcin emphasized. Kerwinski, Moscow has intensified hybrid attacks in Europe, and the aggressor country is thus testing the reaction of Europeans, their ability to make decisions, and their willingness to use force, says the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Kirill Budanov. My colleague Kristina Dombrovska will tell you more about this.
Countering hybrid threats from Russia and Belarus. The main topic is the meeting of the Ministers of Internal Affairs of Finland, Denmark, Norway, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Germany, Sweden, and Estonia in Gdansk on October 28th.
Recent events in Poland, Denmark, Germany, and Lithuania have shown that there are now also attempts to influence Europe from the air. EU member states must have the tools to detect and counter such activities. EU member states located on the eastern border play an especially important role in ensuring the security of Europe as a whole. That is why Union support in the fight against drones and other aerial threats is crucial in the current financial period, which will end in 2027. Maria Rantanen, Minister of the Interior of Finland, from a statement on the ministry's website.
Just last week, Lithuania was forced several times to close airports in Vilnius and Kaunas. According to the Lithuanian State Border Guard Service, since the beginning of 2025, there have already been 500 recorded cases of violations of the country's airspace, with balloons so-called weather balloons from Belarus.
The Ministry of Defense will take action, and as of today, trial reconnaissance operations have been conducted. The Army will take all necessary measures, including kinetic ones, to shoot down the balloons. They will start doing this. So, once again, we are sending a signal that we are ready to take even the toughest measures when our airspace is violated. We do not rule out the possibility not only of coordinating actions with our neighbors, but also of discussing the activation of NATO Article 4.
After Lithuania closed its border with Belarus in response to provocations, officials in Vilnius stated that, if necessary, they could also halt Russian transit to Kaliningrad.
We reserve the right to close the transit if it is necessary to ensure our security. Of course, this will be done in coordination with the EU institutions and member states. Kęstutis Budrys, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, speaking on LRT radio.
The Baltic countries have become a testing ground for Russian hybrid warfare tactics, according to Estonia's Minister of Internal Affairs, Igor Taro. Drones are increasingly violating the airspace of European countries. In the fall of 2025 alone, about 15 European airports halted operations due to reports of drone sightings. On October 27th in Spain, an unidentified drone was spotted for the first time over the runway at Alicante-Elche Airport, according to the Spanish publication EFE.
Russian aggression has intensified. It has spread even further west. Every month, Ukraine suffers from an increasing number of drones launched for attacks. And last month, we saw 19 such drones over the Polish border. A few days later, we saw Russian aircraft violate Estonian airspace. And at the same time, Russia launched a coordinated campaign to undermine the elections in Moldova. Here at home, we continue to defend ourselves every day against threats that range from the seabed to cyberspace.
In the Kremlin, all these facts are called provocations and their involvement is denied. Involvement! On October 28th, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Lavrov, stated that Russia allegedly had no intention, nor has any intention, of attacking a NATO or EU country. At the same time, Moscow is openly threatening the world with nuclear weapons. The chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Gerasimov, reported to Putin that on October 21st, tests of the Burevestnik cruise missile were conducted with a nuclear power unit. Norway confirmed that the Russian missile was launched from the archipelago. Novaya Zemlya in the Barents Sea, writes Reuters, citing data from Norway's military intelligence service.
The Russian dictator, Putin, made an absurd statement about wanting to invite foreign media journalists to Pokrovsky-Kupiansk, supposedly to demonstrate the encirclement of Ukrainian troops. He allegedly discussed the issue of stopping hostilities with the commanders, and they approved such a decision. Let's discuss this news. We have a guest joining us. Yuri Fedorenko, commander of the 429th Separate Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment of the Ukrainian Ground Forces. Yuri, welcome.
Greetings. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Well, to start with, it's interesting to know how the armed forces of Ukraine are commenting on such a statement.
I can share my own opinion because there is the General Staff, which can comment at the level of those who represent all the armed forces of Ukraine, the joint forces of Ukraine. As a serviceman, what can I say? At this moment, if we analyze the current information agenda, what's happening now in the United States, what's happening in the European Union, and what's happening in Russia itself, it's absolutely clear that Russia cannot fulfill the obligations it took on in Alaska. What did Putin say to Trump? He said that he could easily take full control of the Donetsk region by military means. He said that they have enough forces and resources to take control of Kupiansk. He said that they have enough forces and resources to keep going, to conduct active combat operations and advance further. Let's take a moment to remember what happened before, when in 2022 the defense forces carried out stunning operations in Kharkiv, Kherson, and Kotornasto. And as a result, remember how it was back then. Putin commented that they supposedly withdrew their troops in order to focus more on the Donetsk region to accomplish their objectives there, and that's why they regrouped their forces like that. Although, in reality, they were driven out by the defense forces. And so, after they regrouped, I'm saying this now, they failed to achieve any operational breakthroughs along the line of contact. That is why every city is absolutely essential and crucial for Putin. Break time equals 0.5s/ in terms of demonstrating the so-called might of the Russian army. As a means, they are very actively using their personnel, like suicide squads, so that they, disguising themselves as civilians and risking their lives, would sneak through to certain locations, slipping between the defense forces to plant a Russian flag, like in Vovchansk, film it all on a Mavic drone that flies in, and then declare that this area is definitely under their troops' control. But in reality, this is just bravado, and this information does not reflect the truth. Putin needs this so that he can show that his words, the ones he says, like, now we will conquer Ukraine, do not match his actual actions or his real capabilities. That's why we need to say the following. As of today, Russia has not changed its goals and objectives regarding Ukraine. They are planning, in full measure, to destroy Ukrainian statehood, to destroy us as the bearers of this statehood, in other words, to destroy the Ukrainian people. They have prioritized the stages of occupation above all else. The key battles are now taking place in the Donetsk region, but at the same time. In the Kharkiv region, the enemy is active. In the Kherson region, they are terrorizing the local population, and in the Zaporizhzhia region, the enemy is more than just active. As a result, the enemy will continue their offensive actions, and right now it is very important for all of us, I mean both the citizens of Ukraine and those countries that are helping us financially and with their weapons, to understand that the only thing that can stop Putin and break him is funding the defense forces so they can hold him at the front lines of contact. And these are technologies, advanced technologies, that should help us secure our Ukrainian skies. These are air defense systems, both stationary and portable. This is funding for drones. And, of course, it is the ability to obtain those types of weapons that will allow us to operate on the territory of the Russian Federation against legitimate military targets, or against those targets that, in turn, generate profits. Money earned from oil products. And the sanctions, which have not yet fully come into effect, but already, as a preventive measure, specific actions have begun, such as when the Russian Federation tries to sell its Lukoil assets located outside the borders of Russia. Therefore, one way or another, economic sanctions plus direct action on the territory of the Russian Federation. This is what should force Putin, dictator Putin, to halt military operations. At the same time, we must also say that discussions within Ukraine, as well as conversations outside the country with our foreign partners about the possibility of stopping hostilities in the near future, are currently very disadvantageous for Ukraine. Let me try to explain. Businesses in Ukraine hear that there could potentially be a halt to military operations. Right now, they're wondering which components to buy, whether to shift to another market or not. Businesses that are holding on to money and supporting the defense forces are thinking, maybe I should hold back for now. If the war ends, I'll restore my business that was bombed by the Russian Federation, modernize it. Civilians, in turn, are thinking, if the war ends soon, why go through recruitment? Why mobilize in the armed forces? Why change their way of life? You see what I mean? And how can a soldier go into battle when he thinks the war might end soon? But in the Russian Federation, the situation is different. Because their army is basically made up of mercenaries. They pay people to mobilize and then fight against Ukraine, so they're experiencing a boom. Because the average Russian guy thinks, if the war is ending, I need to sign a contract fast, get the money, otherwise I might not have time to fight. And as a result, they end up having people to fight on the battlefield, because the war isn't ending. And unfortunately, it will continue for some time yet.
Yuri, thank you for joining us so quickly and, in general, for making it clear that the person who calls himself the president of Russia is talking about fakes. Interesting. Yuri Fedorenko was with us on the line, commander of the 429th Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems Achilles of the Ground Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump intends to increase pressure on Putin if he does not agree to end the war against Ukraine. This was stated by U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matt Whitaker, noting that sanctions are only part of the measures provided by the White House. Measures. We have imposed these sanctions and intend to stick to them. Perhaps this will force Putin to come to the negotiating table and put an end to the war, or at least agree to a ceasefire, so that a final solution can be worked out. The new measures from Washington. This is just the beginning. President Trump holds all the cards. This is just one of them. There are many others. Matthew Whitaker, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, in an interview with Bloomberg. Only through joint efforts can the countries of the world force Russia to end the war. This was stated by Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, on the air of Freedom TV channel. He noted that one of the main tasks right now is to force the aggressor country to retreat and return to dealing with its own internal problems.
Through joint efforts, Europe, the US, Ukraine, and even neutral countries, for example, Middle Eastern countries and so on. The same goes for China. If it eventually realizes that it's strategically disadvantageous to keep the world in a state of major war or on the brink of a major war, then, of course, it will be possible to put enough pressure on Russia to... I understand that modern Russia will never reach an adequate state. It's just impossible, yes, with the kind of elite that Putin has brought together. You can't get an effective, competitive country, and so on. That's just an objective fact, yes. But in principle, to force it to back off out of fear. Somewhere, to hide away and deal with its own internal problems, which will come crashing down on their heads and so on. That's the main goal.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.